Good evening, everyone. We'd like to welcome Mr. Roper down from Stowe to our beautiful little village of Ludlow. As you know, Mr. Roper has over 20 years of freelance journalism and political activism under his belt here in Vermont. He has a beautiful wife and dog and 2 adult children, and he writes under Robert Roper on Substack. If anybody wants to follow him, I'd highly recommend it. That's how I found out about him, and I'm happy to welcome Mr. Roper.
Thanks, Justin, and thank you all for coming out on what is one of the most beautiful days of the year to come in and listen to me talk. Just a little bit about myself before I get into it. As Justin said, I've been involved in Vermont politics literally since I moved here. In 1998 with my wife, we had been married in Vermont 2 years before we moved here. The only person I knew in the state was the Justice of the Peace who married us, who also happened to be the representative from Manchester. So when I came up here, my wife was the one who got the job. We had a pact that whoever could make it work in Vermont, the other would figure it out once we got here. I'm still figuring it out. But I only knew Judy Livingston. I said, Judy, what should I do? She said, my friend Ruth Dwyer is running for governor, work on her campaign. I said, okay. So I did. I worked on her campaign, and then I got involved with the Jack McMullen's campaign for U.S. Senate, where I met the McClourys, John and Ann McCloury, and they got me to start a Freedom Works chapter. And I thought, well, in order to get myself a little bit better known in the state and to get the Freedom Works chapter going, I'll run for chairman of the Vermont Republican Party. And I won, which I honestly wasn't really expecting to do. So I did that job for 3 years, and I took over the Ethan Allen Institute from John McCloury in 2013 and ran that for 9 years. And for the last couple of years, as Justin said, I've been writing on my own as a freelance writer on Substack. I write a column called Behind the Lines, Rob Roper on Vermont politics. And a little bit about how that came about before I jump into the issues of who and why Vermont is so unaffordable today. But my motivation for starting the column was, as I was finishing up my time with the Ethan Allen Institute, I used to write a once-a-month column that I would send out to all the local papers, and some of them would pick them up, and some of them wouldn't. But I sent it out to one on the clean heat standard, because this was just starting to bubble up as an issue in Vermont, the Clean Heat Standard and the Global Warming Solutions Act and all that. And it was obvious at that time that the people behind it really didn't want anybody to know what it was going to cost or really how it was going to work. It was all being done sort of on the QT. And I had written, I think, 2 articles on it in the last 2 months, and I was submitting a third. And I got a nice note back from the op-ed editor at Vermont Digger, who used to be the editor of my local paper in Stowe. And I think he was being friendly, but he said, why don't you write about something else? Why do you keep writing about this clean heat standard? Just shake it up a little bit. And I wrote him back. I said, Tom, I've written 3 articles on it. Well, I've written 2. You published 2 articles in the last 2 months on a proposal that is supposed to fundamentally transform our economy in the state of Vermont. It's going to cost literally billions of dollars for ratepayers, taxpayers, and it's going to alter our lifestyle and the kind of cars that we drive and the kind of heat that we use to heat our homes in a very cold state. Don't you think that warrants more than 2 750-word articles in 2 months? And I said, in fact, Tom, what you guys should be doing is you should have a reporter full-time. All these things are on Zoom. They can go back and watch it on their own free time. They're all open to the public. And it's all the resources there. You should have a full-time reporter on just this between now and the time that it is passed, because people really need to understand what's going on. I never got a response to that email. And it was at that point, it was kind of, okay, if not you, then who? And that's when I started writing my column. 2-year anniversary in January. Since I started, I just did sort of a search of it, looking for an article that I'd written a while back, and I've done 85 articles on the Clean Heat Standard and the Global Warming Solutions Act, really delving into that policy so people can understand what it does, who's behind it, why they're behind it, and how it's going to affect their lives. And that's going to be sort of the lead issue that I start off with on my talk tonight, which is this is going to cover, why Vermont is so unaffordable. We've been hearing about affordability since the Jim Douglas days of when he was the governor of the state. I think he coined the term affordability as an issue for Vermont. It has been the issue that's talked about. And I think this year it's really come to a head because we've seen the property tax spike that hit. We've got the Clean Heat Standard. We have the other components of the Global Warming Solutions Act, which is going to be the transportation standard, which hasn't gotten a lot of press yet because that's just a study at this point. We've seen health insurance costs go through the roof. Every year for the past, I think, 3, maybe 4 years, it's been double-digit increases. This year we're looking at a possible 20% increase, I think it is, from Blue Cross Blue Shield. And people just can't seem to afford the state, and a lot of people, in fact, I was talking before I came up and gave my talk, there was a radio show on WDEV, Vermont Viewpoint, hosted by a guy, well, they have some conservatives hosted a couple of days, and they have some liberals hosted, or a liberal hosted for 2 days, and then they've got somebody who's neutral and doesn't talk about politics, hosted on Monday, and the liberal host was on, and he had on Peter Shumlin's former chief of staff and former campaign manager on to talk, and he was saying, nobody cares about this property tax increase, and nobody cares about the Clean Heat Standard. Look at what happened with Stuart Ledbetter, the Channel 5 anchorman who ran for the Senate. He lost his race, and his Burlington business people put money behind another moderate in the primaries, and they lost all of their races. So my conclusion is nobody cares about these prices. And she said, Shulman's former campaign manager and chief of staff, Alex McLean, said, my husband's a realtor up in St. Johnsbury, and he's listed more houses in the last 2 weeks than he has in the previous 2 months. And why is that? Why are they doing it now? It's not normal. Normally people start listing their houses in the spring when the snow melts and things start to pretty up a little bit and people are going to be more likely to buy. Why are they doing it now? They got their property tax. That's why they put their houses on the market. I mean, when a natural disaster comes in, a flood knocks people out of their homes in so many communities. I mean, this one hit as hard as anything. Everybody's, rightly so, feels for the people who've lost their homes. But what about when it's property taxes? What about when it's the policies put forward by the people under the Golden Dome or have the exact same effect on folks as a natural disaster? That's what we're dealing with in the political climate today. So I will start off talking about the first issue will be the Clean Heat Standard because there was breaking news on this. It was just yesterday that the group NV5, which is a consulting group hired by the Department of Public Service to look into how this is going, they did what's called a potential study, which is what is the potential for how this program could work? What is the maximum we can do potentially through the Clean Heat Standard? And one of their tasks was to figure out what this is going to cost in terms of impact to our economy, in terms of impact to individual homeowners. And this is the number that I've been screaming about for 3 years. Why I started writing my column. Julie Moore came out with a back of the napkin, the head of the Natural Resources Agency, came out with a back of the napkin calculation a couple years ago, said it's going to be 70 cents a gallon. She counted up all the heat pumps that need to be installed. She counted up all the hot water heaters that need to be installed, the pellet stoves, and said that's what this is going to cost. And if we have to pay for 75% of all of those costs, it's going to cost 70 cents a gallon. They were apoplectic that she would dare to put out this misinformation about how expensive this program was going to be. 7 cents a gallon, it's wrong. Well, this NV5 has been working on this for months and months now. They came out with their number, and the maximum that it could be for a gallon of oil is $4.01. according to their calculations, on top of what it already is now. $1.78 is the low ball, so $1 more than what Julie Moore's back of the napkin calculation came out with, and the high end is at $4.01 per gallon of heating fuel for your home. Think about it. Think about it. How much that costs to fill a 250-gallon tank? It's $4. That's an extra $1,000 carbon credit tax that you're going to have to pay to heat your home through winter in Vermont. So that's a big reason why I think this election is so important. Because what's going to happen with the clean heat standard, the way they wrote the bill, Act 18, it passed. We are committed to the Global Warming Solutions Act, which passed in 2020, which said we have these mandates to lower our greenhouse gas emissions by certain amounts by 2025, 2030, and 2050. We are going to miss our 2025 goal because weather's getting colder now. 2025 is just a couple of months away. We're not even close. They haven't even passed the clean heat standard, which is supposed to address the thermal sector. They haven't even conceived of how they're going to do the transportation sector, and I haven't heard a single idea about how they're really going to handle the agricultural sector. But this was the big thing, the clean heat standard. And the way the bill is structured is that they passed it. We're committed to having a carbon credit market. The way the carbon credit market works is that a fuel dealer who brings oil, natural gas, propane, kerosene into the state, whoever brings it across the border for sale in Vermont is obligated to purchase or somehow obtain a clean heat credit for every ton of CO2 that that product will release into the atmosphere when it's burned. So they have to figure out the calculation of how much the credit is going to cost and what it's going to be worth, and they have to create an exchange. It's a commodities exchange. I could spend the whole half hour that I'm going to talk to you tonight just talking about how complicated this thing is, but I will leave it. So they have to buy these things. And the Public Utilities Commission is currently writing the rules for how all of that is going to take place. So when the legislature comes back in January of 2025, after this coming election, the new legislature is going to have to vote on whether or not to adopt the rules that govern the program. And if the legislature votes no on the rules presented by the Public Utilities Commission, they can either go back and rewrite the rules and vote again, or they can let it lie and keep this thing dormant for as long as possible. And if they never approve the rules, the thing will never go into effect. So if you cannot afford $1.78 to $4 a gallon more to heat your home over the course of the winter, you better find out what your candidate is thinking about how they're going to vote when these rules come up in 2025 of next year. That should be the question every voter asks, every candidate. The clean heat standard's coming up, the rules are coming up for a vote in 2025 in January. How do you plan to vote on the home heat carbon tax? And make sure they answer truthfully. And if they say, well, I don't know, take them through what I just told you and say, what's your threshold? What's your threshold? How high will you go? Because if it's really $1.78, are you okay with that? If it's $4, are you okay with that? If it's 95 cents for propane, are you okay with that? If it's $2.13 per gallon propane, are you okay with that? That's the question that voters need to do. That's how you got to be an informed public. Is so important to a functioning democracy. So that's the clean heat standard. Some of the other things that are coming up is, of course, property taxes. Yes?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, I guess we can do questions one at a time.
Just on the clean heat standard before you move on.
Yeah.
The part that I don't understand, that I think is so ludicrous, is they're trying to push people into putting in heat pumps in electric cars. And I guess the oil companies can get credits by subsidizing installing those things in people's houses?
Yes. So,
but yet the carbon footprint of the manufacture of electricity remains the same. So you move, how does that save
Well,
I mean, it doesn't say, that doesn't change the carbon footprint, does it?
well, if you go from, the question for the folks, so that you hear the camera, here on the camera, is how does switching, creating a clean heat credit lower the carbon footprint by switching from, say, oil to a cold climate heat pump? The heat pump will, this is actually an interesting question, because theoretically, if you switch from a heat pump that is getting its electricity from a renewable resource, then you're lowering the carbon footprint.
Agreed.
But here's the thing about it. I said I was going to get into these weeds, but your question opens up how a credit works. They have to determine, it's based on a ton of carbon. A credit is based on a ton of carbon. So it's like mining gold or Bitcoin, really. It's sort of, we're creating, a carbon credit is really like a cryptocurrency, almost. You have to mine it in order to get it by removing carbon from the atmosphere. So every time, if you say, let's say I'm a contractor, and you say, I want to put in 2 cold climate heat pumps in my house. I can't just say, I install a heat pump, or 2 of them, or however many. I have to determine, somebody has to determine exactly how much carbon that's going to take out of the atmosphere, based not just on the fact that you put in a heat pump, but what kind of house do you have? How well insulated is it? How big a space is the heat pump actually heating? Are you using the heat pump to air condition in the summer, and you're using an oil furnace backup in the winter, in which case you're not taking any you're actually increasing your carbon footprint if the electricity is being generated by off the New England grid. Somebody has to figure that out in order to make the credit viable. And this is something that is probably going to have to be regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, because this is a commodity that they're creating. Now think about that. Think about how complicated that is to verify. And think about the fact that they have to do something like 120,000 cold climate heat pumps by 2030. Every one of those applications has to be evaluated to that extent. Can you imagine the bureaucracy?
Oh, no, I agree with you, that's why
That'll take. So yes, it's a good question. It's really crazy. And then they're going to have to create this exchange for where you can buy. Okay, so you now own a credit. I install it for you. You own the credit. So then I say, sign your credit over to me, and I'll give you a discount on my installing your heat pump. So then I can own the credit. But if I'm not an obligated party, say I'm an HVAC company, I'm not an obligated party because I don't import fuel to the state. But the fuel dealer needs it. So then I've got to go sell that credit on an exchange to the fuel dealer who needs to own that credit in order to sell you the heating fuel that you need in order to survive the winter. This is insane. This is insane. And it's going to cost the state literally, I think, $16 billion is the latest total estimate. And it's still low, because when I talk that $4 a gallon, it doesn't include the cost to do what I just described to you. That's just the cost for the heat pump, all the heat pumps, all the electric that has to go in, and all that other stuff. It doesn't include the cost to run the exchange, the bureaucracy to manage the exchange, and all that. So this is, why is Vermont unaffordable? It's because the people we send to Montpelier think that stuff like this is a good idea, and they pass it into law. It's the law. Act 19 is law. We can stop the rules, but we will have to repeal the law in order to get this to go away. Tied into it is another bill I want to talk about, and that's the Renewable Energy Standard bill that was passed this year. And unfortunately, there's no vote coming up on this in 2025. But the Renewable Energy Standard, Act 179, again, this was another that the governor vetoed, and his veto was overridden by the supermajority in the legislature, so it did become law. Basically, we have a renewable energy standard that was supposed to get us to, I think it was 80% renewable energy, wind, solar, by 2032. They pushed it back in this law to 2030, and then they upped the mandate from 80 to 100%.
What?
Yeah, that. I hope the microphone didn't catch that last word. Yeah, and here's the thing. Basically, this was the most corrupt process that I have witnessed in my 20 plus years well, maybe not the most corrupt, but certainly in the top 5. Because over last summer, I guess, yeah, a year ago summer, not the one that's coming too fast to close now, they had a working group come together, do a summer study on the renewable energy standard. It was made up of lobbyists from VPERG, from the Energy Action Network, from the Sierra Club, and there was one other group, all of whom have board member ties to the renewable energy. Their donors, their board members are, they work for SunCommon, they work for Matthew Rubin and David Blittersdorf. Those folks are donating. So their paid lobbyists are on the working group writing the legislation. And the utilities are saying, look, the way you're structuring this law, you're forcing us to work with certain people. That was their quote. You're forcing us to work with certain people. Now, one of the legislators on that committee, there were 4 of them, asked, who are we forcing you to work with? Because it was the bosses of the lobbyists who are on the working group. Is exactly the way the bill was being written, was forcing them to work with. Because they want to build more wind, they want to build more solar, and they're forcing, through this bill, our utilities to buy electricity from these donors. And the utilities throw up their hands at the end of this, and they were saying, look, you can achieve the goals of the Global Warming Solutions Act faster, and you can achieve them cheaper for customers if you don't make us do this. If you just let us go out and buy the renewable energy on the market, we can do it cheaper and we can do it faster. No. They say, oh, we care so much about the environment. We think that the earth is going to spontaneously combust in 9 years if we don't do something about it. When you really get down into it, you look at what they're doing, it's not a factor. It's about the money. It's about the money. So the renewable energy standard, that's law. That's another reason why Vermont is unaffordable. It's going to, the estimates say, increase costs somewhere between $450 million and $1 billion over 10 years for ratepayers because of the way they're doing it, the way I just described. And if it's the high end of that, for the average home, that means another $192 a year for your electric bill. $192 in Vermont means about 2 weeks worth of groceries for the average person that they're taking out of your mouth in order to basically play politics with our energy policy. So add that to if you're 250 gallon fill up on your tank, probably have to do that a couple of times during winter, $1,000 a pop. That's why people can't afford to live in the state of Vermont. Property taxes. Property taxes. Everybody knows about the property tax bill that was just passed. It was the Yield Bill Act 183. Again, this is a place where you see politics really rear its ugly head in the sausage-making process. We all know that property taxes and Act 60 plus, going back to 1997, is a mess. It is the most bizarre, inexplicable way of financing education that anyone could imagine. But the way I like to describe it is, if you're looking at it from the point of view of a citizen and a taxpayer, you look at Act 60, Act 68, Act 153, all the patchwork that they've done, and you say, this is incomprehensible, it's a mess, and it doesn't do anything fairly, and it doesn't seem to be getting good results for the kids. It looks silly. But if you look at it from a different perspective, as a system designed to extract the most amount of money from the taxpayers with the least amount of accountability to the people in charge, it is a Swiss watch. And it is working exactly the way it is intended to work. Because what you have with our property tax system, our education finance system now is, who do you throw out of office if you're upset with your bill? You go to the people in Montpelier and say, my God, you just passed the yield bill. I can't afford this. I'm gonna vote you out. And they say, well, don't vote me out. I didn't have anything to do with how much you're paying that. We were forced to pass this bill because of the school budgets that you passed in your local communities. We have to fund that amount. And you go, okay, so I'm gonna throw the school budget, the school board out. And they say, well, don't throw us out because of Act 60 plus. I mean, we have to live within the system. We're just trying to fund do our part for the kids here in the community. It's the voters' fault. You voted for this. So you say, okay, well, I'm going to vote down my school budget if I can't afford this. And they say, well, don't do that because it's a statewide system, and if you vote your budget down, they're not voting down their budget in the next town over and the next town over. It's not going to make a darn bit of difference to your bill if you vote down your school budget. So nobody's accountable. And the money just keeps flowing and flowing and flowing into the system. I think it's like $2.6 billion we spend on kids in our school system, and that number has declined since from 106,000 kids in our K-12 system to we're now below 80,000 kids in our school system, yet the money that we spend on them keeps going up and up and up. And the results that we're getting in our test scores are going down. They have been going down for 15 years. People are totally unaccountable to the system. So this year, a couple of the bills that helped drive up to the crisis point. I mean, it's always been very painful to pay your property tax bill, but this in my town, we got a 28% increase. I know in Woodstock, just down the road, I was talking to one of the candidates who's running in Woodstock. They're up around 30%. There are a lot of towns that are just getting walloped by this. And it's kind of like they've been boiling the frog, and all of a sudden they turned it up a little too high. This time I think the frog is jumping out of the pot. Now, some of the bills that they passed, obviously Act 183 is the yield bill, which is the one that sets the property tax rate. But there was a bill that Act 64, which said that we're going to spend $30 million of COVID emergency funds for universal meals. That was paid for with federal dollars. The federal dollars went away because the emergency went away. And they said, well, we're going to keep up this emergency program even though the emergency's gone. And basically what Act 64 said is $30 million to pay for universal school meals instead of just paying for the meals of low-income kids. Free and reduced lunch. We already had that program. So basically you're paying $30 million, about 3 cents on your property tax bill, to pay for the wealthiest kids in the community to have a free lunch. Now, the legislature could have said, we're looking at a 13.8% increase in property taxes. That was COVID emergency funds. We really can't afford that. We're going to back that off so it won't be as bad. They didn't do it. They didn't do it. They ignored that. Scott Beck, who's a Republican from St. Johnsbury, came up with a plan to get a lot of the stuff that should be in the human services budget out of the education budget and into the human services budget, and focus on sort of a core educational program that would be funded through the education fund, through the property tax, which would be reduced number. And that got about 24 hours of serious consideration before the teachers union, the superintendent's union, or association, the principals association came into that conference room and said, absolutely not. You will not do that. And all reform was killed in that moment. Another question, might as well.
So I was school board chair here for 3 years. And one of the things I'm aware of, we don't vote on, like we have supervisory units across Vermont. And I still believe there's about 49 of them.
I think it's 54. I think it's 54 supervisors.
Every one of those has a superintendent, a business manager, a special education director, and all the associated people that go with it for 80,000 kids. But us as voters, we cannot vote on that budget. We can only vote down our local school budget. So we also need our legislators to change it so that we have the ability to vote down these supervisory union budgets. I don't know how we do it or how you can help write about it, but a huge piece of the increases in our local school budgets were not the teachers and were not the pencils. It's those supervisory union budgets.
Yep.
And you have to kill the local elementary school budget to send a message to the supervisory union.
So just for so the camera microphone can pick up your question, or more of a statement, but it's one I totally agree with, is that the supervisory level union of bureaucracy is a big driver of the cost, and it really doesn't buy us anything in terms of student outcomes, the boots on the ground in the classroom, people teaching kids. And you're right, I think it's 54 supervisory unions throughout the state, 4 less than 80,000 kids. There was a longtime legislator from Rutland, Larry Copley, who didn't run this last time, so he's been out for this last 2-year session. But he had a bill that stuck to the wall every year. He was vice chair of the Education Committee in the House to eliminate it all and create one supervisory union for the entire state. And then you'd still have the school district, so you'd still have local control. But just eliminate that whole, not the whole level of bureaucracy, but a big chunk of that. And I think that's something that we really do need to look at as we move forward. But again, here's the problem with the yield bill. And for people out there who are saying, oh my God, they've got to do something. Well, when those special interest groups came into the conference room and said, you're not going to do that reform. You're not going to do anything to cut off the flow of money into our fiefdom. In fact, we're going to increase it by about $200 million, which is what we did. One of the things that happened as a result of the sort of the cover your butt in the bill is, well, we're going to create this task force. They're great on task forces in Montpelier, to look at the problem. They have had, and this is not hyperbole, 38 studies of our education system and how do you reform it. 38 studies that are sitting and gathering dust on shelf. But we're going to have this group come in and look at it for the next 2 years. So if you can't afford your property taxes this year, you can't afford them next year, and you can't afford them the year after that, because they ain't doing anything between now and then. They're studying the problem. Who is this task force made up of? Vermont NEA, Superintendent's Union, the Teachers Union, the Principals Association, the Business Administrators Union for the public school system. It's got a majority votes. I think is it 15 people that are on this committee, and 8 of them, they've got a majority of votes, come from the very people who stopped reform from happening in this past session, and who have stopped every real reform from happening for years, since Act 60's been put into place. They have manipulated. They're the ones who are pushing for the school district consolidation, Act 45. I forget the number now. But 46, Act 46. Yeah, they're the ones who push that, oh, we're going to save all this money if we consolidate the school district. Did you save any money? No. It costs more. That's the game they play. And those are the people that they put in charge of reforming our property tax education property tax system. It's just a farce. It's a farce when you start looking into this and start paying attention to it. The last one that I'm going to talk about, oh no, two more. The reason Vermont is unaffordable is the new payroll tax. I don't know if folks noticed on your paycheck, there's a new line item now, thanks to Act 76, starting last July. That is a 0.44% payroll tax that just comes right out of your check. And this is dedicated for preschool. Again, this is the same folks that I was just talking about with your property tax are trying to, basically they've been working on this for 20 years. One of the first issues I got involved in back in the early 2000s or mid 2000s, they want to take over the child care industry because the number of kids in the K-12 system is shrinking. They want the 12 to 15,000 kids who are in pre-K to be moved into the public school system, create new grades, and this is a big step in that direction. First thing that they did is they created the child care crisis by regulating home-based cares out of business, pretty much. They did that in 2015. Since then, we've seen about 25% decline in the number of slots. I think it's like 2,000, 2,600 slots for childcare, and they want these consolidated, very public school-oriented, center-based care is what they call it, which means that you probably have to drive. If you're a parent, you have to pay more, and you have to drive further in order to drop your kid off, rather than having a mom and pop organization. My wife and I actually did this when our kids were little, as we started a pre-K for 6 kids, and we did it in a neighbor's house for a year and in our house for 2 years. But that's become really difficult to do now, thanks to the regulation. And now people are screaming, I can't find a place to get. Oh well, we'll come in and we'll do a taxpayer-funded program. So this is $120 million in this 0.44% payroll tax coming out to pay for subsidized childcare through not quite the public school system yet, but we're getting there. And a couple of things that you need to know about this tax. Everybody says, oh, it's just like $16 a month, or $16 a paycheck if you're making $1,500 a year. Well, if you're making $1,500 a paycheck, you're making about $39,000 a year, which is below living wage in Vermont, according to the living wage study. And $16 a month works out to a chunk of change. Again, it's a few weeks worth of groceries at the end of the year, or it's your internet connection for the year. But again, what you got to worry about with this, apart from the fact that it's now law, is the $120 million that is expected to raise is a fraction of what the ultimate program they're trying to institute is going to cost. The RAND Corporation did a study for the state on this, and they determined that it is actually going to cost not $120 million, but about $800 million a year in order to fully implement this pre-K program. So we're spending about $350 million already on it, so this $120 million tax has to go up to be about a $500 million a year tax coming out of everybody's paycheck. Eventually, that's where it's going. The other thing that you have to worry about the payroll tax is that this is not the only program that the supermajority has its eyes on, or has eyes for this tax on. The other one is one that you probably heard a lot about in the news, and that is paid family leave, a government-run paid family leave program. Now, that's sort of been sidelined because they have a lot of other big projects going on, but it's still there. It's still one of the priorities of the majority leadership. And if that is also put on to payroll tax, you're talking about another $100 million a year added to the payroll tax. So another 0.5%. So you're talking, all said and done, when this thing finally happens, 2%. 2% on your income. That's everybody. That's somebody making minimum wage, but pay 2% of their income on this payroll tax. Or a child care program, it really is the result of a self-made crisis. It's really not good governance. It's really not good governance. And the last reason I think that the legislature is pushing us towards unaffordability is health insurance premiums, which everybody's seen. Blue Cross Blue Shield, the Green Mountain Care Board is let's see if I can. Oh, I have the numbers here. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont is to increase individual premiums by 19.8% and small group premiums 22.8% over this year's rates. According to the Green Mountain Care press release, MVP Health, the only other insurer to offer plans in the marketplace, will be allowed to raise its individual premiums 14.2% for individuals and 11.1% for small groups over 2024 rates. That's huge. That's a huge amount on top of your increased heating bill, and you're paying for that with a decreased paycheck because of the payroll tax. And they passed the bill this year, Act 111, which, it got a lot of great press because it said that you're not going to have to, or a doctor, if you go into the doctor's office, the doctor no longer has to go through the insurance company in order to prescribe some sort of treatment for you. The insurance company doesn't get a chance to say, do something else, or no, we don't cover that, or the doctor just does it, and the insurance company is forced to pay for it. Well, a lot of people say, yay, that's great. Well, that comes with a cost, and the cost was 3 to 7% increase. So it's not the total 22% for say, Blue Cross Blue Shield, but that was a big chunk of it. And for everybody who's out there that says, government needs to get involved in healthcare, government has been involved in our healthcare since 1993, when Howard Dean got rid of the community rating and guaranteed issue, or implemented a community rating and guaranteed issue for healthcare. What's happened to it's made it less expensive, more accessible? No, it's been exactly the opposite. And the Green Mountain Care Board is government-managed healthcare, and it's going through the roof. So when people come up to you and say, we want single-payer healthcare, we want the government to get private insurance out of it, we need to get private insurance back into it, because what we have now with Blue Cross Blue Shield and MVP and these programs, they are a de facto government program. They are not the private industry. They are completely regulated by the state, and they're carrying out state funds at taxpayer/ratepayer expense. So those are the key issues that I've been following, and again, if you'd like to learn more about these issues and my take on them, I would encourage you to go to Substack and find my column, which is Behind the Lines, Rob Roper on Vermont Politics. And it's Robert Roper at substack.com. And with that, I can take any questions that you might have. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Roper.
Yes, sir.
The solution is eliminate the supermajority.
I'm sorry, what was the first part?
The solution is to eliminate the supermajority.
Well, yeah, I do think that all of these bills, with the exception maybe of the healthcare bill, were vetoed by Governor Scott. And the supermajority overrode all of the clean heat standard, the renewable energy standard, the payroll tax. All of those were overridden. So yes, I do think that a key thing for voters to do is to really talk to your candidates and know where they stand on these things, and make sure that you're trying to restore some balance to the legislatures. Right now, there's 37 Republicans in the House and 107 Democrats, and I think 3 progressives and 3 independents, 2 of whom vote almost entirely with the Democrats. And that's just, there's no balance. They don't need to listen to anybody. And a lot, unfortunately, in the past, a lot of them have gone unopposed in their elections. So they think they have a mandate, and even if they don't think they have a mandate, they don't think that they're accountable, because they're going to get not voted in anyway, but they'll just waltz into office because there's nobody running. There are a lot of people running. There are a lot of challenge races this year, which is great to see. So yeah, we do need to bring some balance back to the State House. Yeah.
I'm 35 years old, and I grew up in Vermont, and I couldn't wait to leave when I turned 18. And here I am sitting back here. I noticed that 2020, there seemed to be an influx of people moving here to escape city life and maybe the fast-paced nature of where they were living. I'm curious if you made mention of the pupil count steadily declining, and I was witness to that time they closed the school here, obviously in 2020. What happens if people flee in droves. Myself, I love Vermont. I wouldn't want to ever consider moving, but these, quite frankly, I'd be shaking their boots. So what happens if everybody decides to leave?
So the question is, what happens if we have a mass exodus? Well, obviously the economy will collapse. I don't think it's going to be, like a popping bubble. But I do think, actually, I wrote about, made this analogy in my last column, is what I think we're moving towards is what I call a country club economy, where you have the members are the folks who can happily fork over a 5-figure property tax bill as sort of your dues. The staff are the people who are in one way or another on the government payroll, and then the hoi polloi is everybody else can. But the problem with that strategy is that the people who are really left out are the middle class working people who do all the jobs that make everything else work. So, if the country club isn't so wonderful if there's no restaurants in town because you can't hire waitstaff, you can't hire cooks, or you can't get a plumber, or you can't get an electrician to come fix your house, or a handyman. If those kind of folks leave, then that will make for a very unpleasant place to live.
I did want to follow up on this question. I'm sorry.
Oh, forgot the question. Anybody else? Yes, sir, in the back.
What are some of your suggestions for reforming education spending?
Well, here's what I would do, if anybody's listening. We need to have immediate property tax relief. There are 47 states that have some sort of cap on the impact that property tax increase can have to you as a homeowner. They can be a cap on the property tax rate itself. They can be a cap on your bill, a dollar amount. It can be a cap on how they calculate the common level of appraisal on your house as it goes into. 47 states have some sort of way of capping that, so you don't get a 20% increase in your property tax in a given year. The 3 states that don't have the caps are Tennessee, which doesn't seem to need one because they have some of the lowest property taxes in the country. Our neighbor across the Connecticut River, New Hampshire, does not have one because they primarily rely on the property tax for all of their income. They have no sales tax, they have no income tax. And Vermont, which we have all the other taxes on top of that. So my suggestion for how we would do it is we would keep, the way our education fund now is it gets all of the property tax, it gets all of the sales and use tax, it gets a portion of the rooms and meals tax, it gets the lottery, and I think it gets cannabis, some of the cannabis stuff now, but I could be wrong about that. And after the yield bill, another tax you're going to get is on your internet software services. So that's a $20 million tax that has now been subsumed by the education fund. It's why my friend John McClary calls it the blob, because it just goes out and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger by eating everything in its path. So, to your question, what would I do? I would implement a cap on individual property taxes, at least temporarily, and then whatever amount is raised through all of the school budgets, the way we have it now, would have to be taken out of the general fund in the meantime. And what that would do is it would put responsibility on the legislature. It would create the accountability that I was saying was missing. Okay, are we going to raise taxes in the general fund, which would be the income tax, in order to fund the difference, or are we going to cut something out of our $8.6 billion budget? And they would have to make that decision, whichever was the most palatable for them. But if we said that property taxes, we're going to revert your property tax bill back to what it was 2 years ago, plus inflation, and that's the cap. It can't go up higher than that. You're safe. At least until we come up with a total revamp of how we fund education. And my total revamp, for those asking, is I would go to what our school choice towns do, which is assign a dollar amount per kid, and that's your budget.
Yeah, remember my question.
You remember your question?
So we were speaking about the health insurance marketplace. I believe an article just came out saying that we have, I think, the highest premium in the country per person.
Oh, I haven't seen that, but it doesn't surprise me.
I'm not 100% sure on that, but I believe that's what I read. And then, circling back to my original point, which was your country club economy, don't we already also have most state employees per capita out of anywhere in the country?
So the question is, do we have the most state employees per capita in the country? I don't know if we have the most, but we're close. I think that there might be one of the other small states has.
So you're almost a de facto country club at this point.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, that's one of the problems that we have is that there are so many people who are dependent upon tax revenue for their income in this state, in one way or another. We have 8,000, I think it's 8,800 people who work for the state directly. You've got 18,000 people that work for like UVM Medical Center, which is a de facto state. You've got 18,000 people who work for the public school system. We have more nonprofits in Vermont per capita than any other state, and I think 1 in 7 jobs, I think I read that statistic, is in the nonprofit sector. And a lot of those nonprofits, not all of them, but a lot of them require government grants. So all those folks are voting to keep the taxes high, so their personal revenue is falling, and they make up, they are the most passionate voters.
It's like an Ouroboros. It's like an Ouroboros at that point.
Yeah.
Snake eating its tail.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you.
I saw another hand. Yes.
I think he was at it.
Okay.
So I actually had a really related question to that, and I think one of the things with liberal and far left agendas is expansion of government, and with the taxation and the revenues generated, that's where I was wondering is what are we looking at from all of these new pieces of legislation, all these new taxes? What does that expansion of government look like going forward if all these things are implemented?
The question was, what is the total expansion of government as a result of all of these programs? And I haven't hit the equals button on my calculator, but it's quite. I think last year, after 2023, Governor Scott's team put it out, and they said it was $1,400 per household in new taxes after 2023. That was including Julie Moore's 70-cent per gallon estimate for the Clean Heat Standard. So that's a multiple higher, a couple multiples higher just for that. Then you also have the payroll tax, and you also have the taxes that came in the yield bill, which is the $20 million for the taxing internet software. As for the number of bureaucrats, I don't really know. I mean, the stuff that I follow, you've got a ton of new bureaucrats that have been hired in the Climate Action Office. You've got a ton that were hired by the PUC to deal with the climate stuff. I think it's 10 or 12 just in those two agencies. So, but I don't know what else they are. Any more?
I just wanted to add, I think the property transfer tax went up also. As part of
Did it
when
go?
you buy a house.
Yeah. Did that pass? I can't remember if that passed.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was a second. Well, it was. Was it second homeowners or was it over a certain amount? I think it. Did that? I can't remember if that passed or not. I remember reading
No,
about
I
it.
think that passed, and that's also into that yield bill. That's
Okay, so yeah, new property transfer tax. Oh, and the one that I did mention today is the DMV fees. I mean, they voted in 2023 to raise your DMV fees by 20%, which is about $20 million for everybody. So if you're registering a car or getting a driver's license, that's just sort of another little kick. And for us drivers, that's a pain. But if you own a trucking company or business that has multiple vehicles, that can be a really big jolt for a small business.
We didn't touch on it tonight, and I'm unsure where the funding came from for the program, but do you know anything about the motel voucher program?
The motel voucher program. The motel. As Reagan said, that there's nothing so immortal as a government program. And again, this is one of those. The motel voucher program was a COVID emergency funded program that put people who were homeless into hotels. That funding went away, but of course the program can't. So our legislators said, well, we're going to have to fund it with Vermont taxpayer money. And I know that they upped it for 6 months. I think it was $30 million for that. And then I think they did it again. And I can't remember what the second re-up was for. And it's coming up again on its expiration date. And we will see where it goes from there. I actually did a column on that a while back. It was one of my favorites. We could have actually bought a cruise ship. And that houses 3,700 people and docked it in Burlington Bay. And it would have been cheaper than what we spent on, these revamped motels. And I'm sure it'd be a heck of a lot nicer. They've all got TVs. I mean, it's a real boat. It's berthed in Portsmouth. It was $32 million. And we could just bought it. It had been here, taken a weekend to get it up here, and it would have medical facilities and pools and everything you want. And it would have saved the taxpayers, I think, like $20 million if we'd gone that route. But nobody took me seriously. Not even me, really. But it's still a better idea than what they came up with.
I read an article from BT Digger a year or so ago, and they didn't do the math, so I ended up doing the math myself. But they said that one hotel in Rutland had 213 rooms and was charging $106 a night that the state's picking up. It's about $21,000 a week.
And yeah, $21,000 an evening for one hotel. Yeah, I mean, that's what you would charge if, tourists come in. But you probably charge leaf peepers more than that. You're coming in. So the hotel's got to make money. I don't blame the hotel owners for charging that rate, and they should probably charge a little more because it's hard to keep the upkeep. From what I understand, a lot of the hotels that have bought into this program are getting trashed.
Yeah.
Yes?
On the child care payroll tax, you didn't actually mention the people that benefit from it, because with the universal lunches, of course, that benefits the ones who can pay, because we've had another program for it. But the child care tax, when I looked at the information, in October it goes up to 575% of the federal poverty level. So a family of 6, which is the cap, can earn over $220,000 and have anybody can have $1 million in assets and still qualify for the child care program. And right now it's at 450% of poverty level. So is there a discussion to be had publicly to address and kind of put that out there to expose that? Who's benefiting from these programs?
So the question goes to the payroll tax for child care. And the audience member made a good point that part of that law is that you can earn up to 575% of the poverty level and still qualify for a subsidy. And 575% of poverty level is like, I want to say $275,000, $272,000 a year, something like that. So if you consider the morality of that, you can have somebody who's making $270,000 a year in their household being subsidized by people who are earning minimum wage through their payroll tax. And yes, I do think that there is a discussion that can be had around the morality of that dynamic. Is that it? Are we good? Thank you everybody for coming, and thanks Justin for setting this up. This is a great evening.